I'm breaking the engagement. Chloe Vance stood in the middle of my office, her tone clipped and final. I didn't look up, but my pen paused for a fraction of a second. What? I'm in love with someone else. The air went still. I'm the CEO of Reed Industries. She's the heiress to the Vance Corporation. Our union was the foregone conclusion of our entire world. And she chose the day I was signing a major acquisition to tell me she was in love with someone else. Who? Blake Ryder. I signed the last page and closed the file. Fine. She froze. That's your reaction? The engagement is off. You can explain it to your father or mine. The color drained from her face. Caleb, don't you care at all? I finally looked up at her. You've already made your choice. She stared at me, her voice turning to ice. I'm getting married. Today. Congratulations. She turned, walked to the door, then looked back. You're not going to retaliate, are you? A small smile touched my lips. Capital doesn't do revenge. It just reallocates. 3 days later, she was married. That evening, I called an emergency board meeting. Reed Industries pulled its backing from all three of Vance Corp's core investments. The banks began to tighten their credit lines. The first time she called me, her voice was frantic. Are you insane? It's a business decision. She was silent for a long time. What are you trying to do? I gazed out at the city reflected in the glass curtain wall of my office. I'm just pulling out. She didn't understand. It was never just the engagement I was pulling out of. 01, when Chloe Vance walked in on 6-inch stilettos, I was signing an acquisition agreement. She didn't knock. The sharp clicks of her heels on the marble floor were a deliberate announcement. My assistant couldn't stop her. She never needed an appointment to see me. Not since we were kids. I'm Caleb Reed, CEO of Reed Industries, the only son. She's Chloe Vance, the sole heir to the Vance Corporation. Our families have been partners for over 20 years. We basically grew up at the same conference tables. I finished the final signature, the nib of my pen making a faint scratch as I lifted it, and only then did I look up. She stood before my desk, posture perfect, makeup immaculate. Her red lips were pressed into a thin line as she waited for me to speak first. I said nothing, just handed the signed document to my assistant. What? I asked. She hesitated, as if surprised that was my only question. I'm in love with someone else, she said. Her voice was soft but certain. The tip of my pen hovered over a notepad for a split second. A single, imperceptible moment. I closed the folder, placed it in the outbox, and met her gaze. All right, I said. The engagement is off. Let your dad and mine know. The silence that followed was heavy. The composure on her face finally cracked. She had probably rehearsed a dozen different speeches. Maybe she thought I'd demand to know who he was, how long it had been, if she'd even considered the impact on our family's businesses. Maybe she'd even braced for me to lose my temper. But I did none of that. I even stood and held the door open for her. Anything else? I asked. She stared at me for a few seconds, her eyes a mixture of defiance and confusion. Caleb, don't you care at all? I looked at her, my expression unreadable. An engagement is a two-way street. You made your decision. I respect it. Her breathing hitched. Did you stop loving me a long time ago? She asked it so quietly I almost missed it. I didn't answer. Words like love have never carried much weight in families like ours. We got engaged a year. She turned 20 and I was 22. The party was a 50-table affair covered by every major financial news outlet. A merger of dynasties, they called it. Everyone, including me, had accepted it as our inevitable path. She'd been spoiled her whole life. Her father doted on his only daughter, giving her everything she wanted. She was used to being the center of attention, accustomed to having others clean up her messes. I'm different. From the day I took over the company at 24, I've had to account for every dollar, negotiate every deal myself. My family gave me the position, but they didn't make the decisions for me. So when she said she loved someone else, my first instinct wasn't anger. It was analysis. Assess the impact. Assess the risk. Assess the cost. She stood motionless in the doorway. His name is Blake Ryder, she added suddenly. I nodded. Noted. Her expression shifted. You're not going to ask who he is? If he's the one you chose, I'm sure you've done your homework. My tone remained perfectly level. She let out a short, cold laugh. You're still the same. So rational it's infuriating. Thank you. She watched me for a moment longer, searching for a crack in my facade. There wasn't one. I learned a long time ago that emotions are the cheapest currency in the world, especially at the negotiating table. She turned and left. The clicks of her heels were angrier on the way out. The moment the door closed, I stood there for a few seconds before returning to my chair. My reflection stared back at me from the glass curtain wall opposite my desk. Calm, almost a stranger. My assistant, David, knocked and entered cautiously. Mr. Reed, about Ms. Vance, notify legal. Have them draft a statement about the dissolution of the engagement. Keep the language neutral. Yes, sir. He hesitated. And our partnerships? I glanced at the files on my desk. Reed Industries was currently funding 3 of Vance Corp's core projects. If the engagement was off, those partnerships would have to be reevaluated. No moves yet, I said. Understood. After he left, the office was silent again. My phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. You're really taking this that easily? I glanced at it and left it on read. At 8 p.m., I was still in a conference room with the investment team, going over a new venture. As the meeting wrapped, my phone lit up with an Instagram notification. It was her. A photo of her, nestled in the arms of a man. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit, with sharp features and a confident, almost arrogant smile. Blake Ryder. I'd seen him once at a gala. He was just another up-and-comer back then, founder of a small but aggressive tech firm. A smooth talker, good at spotting opportunities. The caption was just 4 words. Finally free to be us. The comments were already blowing up. Congratulations from some, questions from others. A few tagged me. I tapped the photo and zoomed in. Her smile was radiant, brighter than in any of the pictures we'd taken together at public events. I hit the like button. Then I closed the app. My assistant came back in with a document and saw my screen. His face paled. Mr. Reed, the file. He handed it to me, fumbling slightly. I scanned 2 pages and signed. From now on, I don't need any updates on Ms. Vance's personal life. Of course. One by one, the office lights were turned off. Night settled over the city outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. It wasn't that I never thought she might leave. I just didn't expect it to happen like this. But she had chosen her path. Now I had to choose mine. A relationship ending is personal. A business partnership is corporate. I would never gamble the future of my company on a broken engagement. And I would certainly never let her decision derail my plans. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my father. Engagement is off. We'll talk tomorrow. His reply came back instantly. A single word. Fine. No questions. No recriminations. That's the Reed way. The next morning, the chatter in the private finance groups on WhatsApp was all about Chloe Vance and Blake Ryder. The narrative was forming fast. Some speculated that the Reed-Vance alliance was over. Others predicted our joint ventures would collapse. I closed the app. The drive to the office was quiet. The sun was bright. A thought occurred to me. From the day we got engaged, everyone assumed we were on a train heading to the same destination. She just decided to get off at an earlier stop. That was fine. At least it happened before the wedding. No complex legal entanglements. No assets to divide. Everything was still under control. When the elevator doors opened onto my floor, I was back in my element. Calm, clear, focused. My assistant handed me the day's schedule. I glanced over it. Schedule a board meeting for 3 p.m. today. He looked surprised. So soon? Yes. Some things can't wait. Since she had gone public with her new relationship, it was time for me to go public with my new position. I walked into my office and sat down. The desktop was clean, files neatly categorized. The glass wall across from me reflected the entire city skyline. I looked at that mirror-like facade. It wouldn't change course because one person walked away. Neither would capital. A relationship can end. A partnership has to be reassessed. My phone buzzed again. It was Chloe. Why did you like my post? I stared at the text for a few seconds. Then I typed back 2 words. Best wishes. After sending it, I put my phone on silent. The briefing materials for the board meeting were already on my desk. I opened the first page. From this moment on, I was no longer her fiancé. I was the CEO of Reed Industries. And she was simply the heiress of a partner company. As for love, or whether it was all worth it, that was her choice to make. I had my own path to walk. 3 days later, I was in a meeting when I heard the news. She didn't tell me. My head of legal mentioned it in passing while handing over a revised contract. By the way, Vance Corp filed a change in marital status for their executive disclosures today. Blake Ryder is now listed as a primary related party. The hand I was using to turn a page paused for a second. Got it, I said. The meeting continued. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID read, Robert Vance. I answered. The line was silent for a few seconds before he spoke. Caleb, I'm sorry about all this. His voice was low, strained. I stood and walked over to the window. It was her decision, Mr. Vance. She's too impulsive, he said, his anger barely contained. She went and got a marriage license today without a word to anyone. I didn't comment. He got to the point. The partnership, this won't affect it, will it? Business is business. An engagement is an engagement, I said evenly. But I will be reevaluating our projects. A 2-second pause on his end. Are you pulling out? Capital needs to be reallocated. Caleb, don't be rash. I don't do rash. I ended the call. Back at the conference table, I had my head of investments brought in. Pull the files on our 3 core investments with Vance Corporation. He looked surprised. Mr. Reed, why the sudden review? We have a board meeting tonight. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Mark Peterson, my investment director, had been with me for years. He knew when I was serious. He lowered his voice. Is this because of Ms. Vance? This is because of ROI. I left it at that. At 3 p.m., the board meeting began. A dozen directors sat around the table. My father, the former chairman, sat at the head of the table, next to me. He remained silent, watching me. I brought up the presentation. First, the Vance commercial real estate project. It's tying up $400 million, and the payback period has been extended by 6 months. Second, the renewable energy venture. $250 million invested, and current returns are below projections. Third, the real estate acquisition fund. Its risk rating has just been upgraded. I paused. My recommendation, based on a comprehensive assessment, is to divest from these core holdings. Someone frowned. If we pull our funding now, the market will see it as retaliation. The market can interpret it however it wants, I said, looking at the director who had spoken. Our job is to worry about our returns. Mark Peterson added, divesting would significantly improve our cash flow. An older director sighed. Reed and Vance have been partners for decades. Isn't this a bit hasty? I flipped to the last slide. Capital doesn't operate on sentiment. The room fell silent. Finally, my father spoke. Call the vote. The result was quick. A clear majority in favor. I signed a resolution on the spot. The divestment process was now in motion. As the meeting adjourned, my father stopped me. You know what you're doing? I do. He gave me a long look, then walked away. At 7 p.m., Chloe called. I watched the screen for a moment before answering. Caleb, you held a board meeting today? I did. Was it your idea to pull the funding? It was a board resolution. She took a sharp breath. What's the point of this? It's a business decision. A few seconds of silence. You're only doing this because of me. The performance data for Vance Corp's projects is in the report. You're welcome to review it. Her voice grew tight. You know, I just got married, that the company is in a transition period. If you pull out now, what will everyone think? My only responsibility is to Reed Industries. After that, she went completely quiet. After a long moment, she said softly, You've changed. So have you. I hung up. Less than an hour later, Blake Ryder requested a meeting. He chose a private club in Midtown. I arrived on time. He was sharper in person than in his photos, his eyes holding a challenging glint. Mr. Reed, you work fast, he said. Efficiency is a priority. He smirked. You're just bitter, aren't you? I picked up my glass of water. You're mistaken. The moment Reed pulls out, the market starts questioning Chloe's judgment, he said, his tone barbed. You're trying to humiliate her. I looked at him. I'm exiting an underperforming investment. You're really that detached? What's the alternative? He leaned back in his chair. People like you, Caleb. You love to pretend you're above it all. People like me? I asked coolly. All calm on the surface, but making moves in the shadows. I set my glass down. If you think there's a problem with the funding, you're free to cover the gap yourself. His expression flickered. The scale of the 3 Vance projects was massive, far beyond what his current company could handle. I will, he said. Then I wish you luck. I stood to leave. He stood up too. Don't you want to know why she chose me? I looked at him. It's irrelevant. He stared at me for a few seconds, then let out a cold laugh. You're too damn calculating to ever be happy. I didn't respond. Walking out of the club, the night air was cold. The moment my car door shut, my phone rang. It was Mark. Mr. Reed, word of the divestment has reached Vance Corp. The banks are already reassessing their credit lines. Follow protocol. Yes, sir. I leaned back against the leather seat and closed my eyes for a moment. This wasn't revenge. It was simply the withdrawal of support. Vance Corp had expanded too quickly over the years, propped up by our capital. Now that the support was gone, the pressure was on. The next morning, Vance Corp stock was volatile. The investment team briefed me. The market is in wait-and-see mode. Continue to monitor. At noon, Mr. Vance called again. Caleb, are you trying to corner us? I'm not targeting anyone. You pull your funding, the banks get nervous, and now our other partners are hesitating. The risk was always there. He was silent for a moment. Do you really have no feelings left for Chloe? I paused for a second. Feelings don't equate to capital. A long sigh came from the other end. She was grilled in the board meeting today. Left speechless. That's her responsibility now. After the call, I went back to my meeting. The team had already prepared a new investment strategy. I pointed at the screen. Redirect this capital to the Tech Park Development Project. Mr. Reed, isn't that a bit rushed? Green-lighted today. Mark looked at me and nodded. At 4 p.m., the news broke. Blake Ryder had given a public statement, calling Reed Industries' divestment an emotional reaction. I saw the article forwarded to me. I made no comment. Mark asked, should we issue a clarification? No, but the market will continue to speculate. Speculation doesn't change cash flow. I stood up, finalized the project implementation plan. The phones in my office rang nonstop. Partners calling to ask what was going on. My response was the same to all of them. Reed Industries is adjusting its investment portfolio based on a standard commercial review. At 9 p.m., Chloe appeared in the lobby of my building. She didn't have an appointment. Security called up to confirm. I told them to send her up. When she walked into my office, she was wearing a simple suit. The joy of a newlywed was nowhere to be seen. Are you satisfied now? She asked. Satisfied with what? Vance Corp spent the entire day explaining our financial situation. They were explaining data. She stared at me. You knew the banks would tighten credit. Banks assess risk. They don't need me to teach them how. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. You just wanted to see me humiliated. If you see this as humiliation, it means the projects themselves are flawed. She froze. You were never like this before. I wasn't the chairman before. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The air was thick with tension. Then, her voice dropped to a near whisper. Don't you feel anything at all? I looked at her. You're a married woman now. The color drained from her face. A few seconds later, she turned and left. This time, she wasn't wearing 6-inch stilettos. Her footsteps were so quiet I could barely hear them. The door clicked shut. I looked down at the divestment papers on my desk. The process was already halfway complete. The capital was flowing back. The night pressed against the glass outside. The city was a sea of lights. Across the way, the lights were on at Vance Corp, too. Only this time, I was no longer the one standing behind them. 03 on the third day of the divestment. Half the capital was already back on our books. My CFO placed the report on my desk. Mr. Reed, our cash flow has improved significantly. There's no pressure on the new project launch. I scanned the numbers and gave a single nod. Updates from the other side were coming in steadily. The banks were officially reviewing Vance Corp's credit lines, and several partners had delayed signing new contracts. They weren't pulling out, just watching. And in this world, watching is a statement. At 10 a.m., Mark knocked on my door. 2 of Vance Corp's suppliers are demanding early payment. What do the contracts say? Net 90. Then we stick to the contract. He nodded and left. I knew the pressure was just beginning. Vance Corp had grown too fast, juggling a commercial complex, a renewable energy venture, and a real estate acquisition fund all at once. The balance sheet looked impressive, but their cash flow was stretched thin. Before, with Reed Industries capital as a backstop, the risk was contained. Now that the backstop was gone, the cracks were starting to show. In the afternoon, my assistant buzzed. Ms. Vance is here. I put down my pen. Sent her in. When the door opened, I looked up. She was wearing flats today. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup less perfect. That ever-present air of untouchable confidence had faded. She walked to my desk, but didn't sit. We need to talk. Go ahead. She took a deep breath. The banks are tightening our credit. You know that, right? I've heard. Several suppliers are demanding early payment. That's an internal issue. She looked at me, a fire smoldering in her eyes. Does it have to be this way? I closed the file in front of me. You made a choice. So did I. Her fingers tightened on the edge of my desk. Do you have any idea how difficult this is for me? You're the COO of Vance Corp now, and you're Blake Ryder's wife. My words stopped her cold. Don't be so cruel. Those are just titles and facts. She stared at me for a few seconds before finally sinking into a chair. Caleb, our families have worked together for decades. You pull out with one word, and what does that make us look like? The public's perception won't fix your cash flow problem. She flinched. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't shown any anger. I was just stating a fact. After a moment of silence, her tone softened. We can renegotiate. Give Reed a higher percentage of the returns. The project's risk profile hasn't changed. We can offer more collateral. You're mortgaging assets, not securing a future. She ran out of arguments. I could see the anxiety in her eyes. The look of someone who had never truly hit a wall, now facing a chain reaction for the first time. Where's Blake? I asked. Her expression stiffened. He's meeting with investors. How's that going? She didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. I stood up, walked around my desk, and stood by the window. Vance Corp needs cash right now, Chloe. Not drama. She shot to her feet, her voice low and strained. Are you enjoying this? Watching us scramble. I turned to look at her. I'm not targeting you, but that's the result. The result comes from the structure. She bit her lip. You never would have treated me this way before. Before, you weren't on the other side of the table. At that, her eyes reddened instantly. She quickly turned away. You won't give us any leeway at all? The board has already passed the resolution. You could call for a new vote. On what grounds? She was quiet for a long time, her voice barely audible when she finally spoke. Caleb, are you really this ruthless? I didn't answer. She stood there, as if waiting for me to deny it. I didn't. After a few seconds, she turned and walked out. The click of the door was soft. I sat back down and opened the next file. At 8 p.m., news from the Vance Corp board meeting reached me. Several shareholders had raised serious concerns. The funding gap was widening and project returns were delayed. Some demanded they scale back investments. Others suggested bringing in new strategic capital. Mr. Vance had reportedly slammed his fist on the table. The meeting ended without a resolution. After Mark gave me the summary, he added quietly, "They're in chaos. Keep an eye on the numbers." Yes, sir. The next morning, I saw a familiar face in one of our meeting rooms. Blake Ryder. He hadn't made an appointment with me, but had come through official business channels. I had him shown to a conference room. When he sat down, his demeanor was colder than last time. Reed, don't you think you've gone too far with this Vance situation? It was an investment adjustment, nothing more. You pull out, and the banks immediately follow suit. Banks read financial statements, not my mind. He leaned back in his chair. You're making things very difficult for Chloe. She already made her choice. His eyes narrowed. Are you betting that she can't handle it? I don't bet. He studied me, looking for a weakness. We can renegotiate the terms of the partnership. What are you bringing to the table? He paused. Future resource integration. Be specific. We have connections in the renewable energy sector. Show me the contracts. He fell silent. I slid a financial analysis across the table to him. This is Vance Corp's current funding gap. He glanced at it, and his face hardened. You did your research quickly. It's public information. He closed the file. Caleb, are you always this rational? It's how you survive. He let out a humorless laugh. All this will do is push Vance Corp toward other investors. The market is always open for business. He stood up. You just wait and see. I didn't try to stop him. Shortly after he left, Mark came in. Vance Corp shareholders are now demanding a concrete plan for management. They'll look for funding. Ryder's company isn't big enough. Then we'll see what kind of terms they can get. At 3 p.m., I got a call from Mr. Vance. He sounded exhausted. Caleb, some of the board members are suggesting I step down. That's an internal matter. They're saying I couldn't control my own daughter. I didn't respond to that. The line was quiet for a few seconds. Have you completely forgotten our history? I'm focused on risk management. He gave a bitter laugh. You're more ruthless than I ever was. The market is more ruthless than it used to be. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The sun streamed through the windows. Below, the traffic flowed endlessly. Everything was normal. In the evening, Chloe showed up at my building again. This time, she didn't come straight up. She waited in the lobby. When I came down, I saw her sitting on a sofa, clutching her phone, looking drained. She looked up and saw me. Can we talk one more time? Go ahead. The board is putting pressure on my father. That's the shareholders' right. You know where this all started. It started with a flawed financial structure. She stared at me, her voice trembling slightly. Blake said he could hold on for a while, but the banks aren't giving us time. That's a problem for them to solve. She suddenly raised her voice. Can't you just back off for a little while? Heads turn in the lobby. I lower my voice. Chloe, this is a corporate headquarters, not our living room. She froze. A few seconds later, her shoulders slumped. I never thought it would come to this. Choices have consequences. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and defiance. If I hadn't, there's no point in talking about that now. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. You're really not going to give an inch? I already did. She looked up. When? The day you walked into my office. She stood there, stunned. I turned to leave. I have a meeting. She didn't follow me this time. The glass doors slid shut, sealing her on the other side. At 10 p.m., the Vance Corp board convened again. This time, a shareholder officially motioned to replace the current management. Mr. Vance lost his temper in the meeting. You're the one who destroyed this marriage. Word of his outburst reached me quickly. I put down my phone without comment. The only sound in my office was the soft clicking of my keyboard. The data kept updating. The situation kept evolving. I didn't intervene, and I didn't back down. 04 after that contentious board meeting at Vance Corp, the market sentiment became undeniable. Two major banks formally reevaluated Vance's comprehensive credit line, slashing the amount and slowing down loan disbursements. Several partnerships that had been on the verge of signing were now indefinitely postponed. I didn't contact Chloe again. At Reed Industries, our new tech park project was moving forward smoothly. The capital was allocated, and we were ready for the upcoming land auction. But I knew this wasn't over. Blake Ryder wouldn't just sit back and watch. Men like him don't admit defeat, and they certainly don't admit they made a bad call. Mar placed a file on my desk. Mr. Reed, this is Ryder's capital trail for the past few years. I opened it. A few years ago, he married into the executive level of his previous company. The marriage lasted 2 years, just long enough for him to leverage their resources and consolidate his position before making a clean exit. After that, he founded his own company. It wasn't large, but his fundraising strategy was incredibly aggressive. He repeatedly used partners as leverage to amplify his presence in the market. He's an aggressive player, Mark commented. Not aggressive, parasitic. And now he's attached himself to Vance Corporation. I said nothing. Vance Corp's brand and asset value were a much bigger prize than any of his previous targets. And Chloe was the key. That evening, there was a gala hosted by a major city industrial fund. The heads of several leading corporations were expected to attend. I had originally planned to send my COO, but I changed my mind. Some messages are best delivered in person. The event was held in a hotel ballroom in the heart of the city. The lighting was soft, the clinking of glasses a constant hum. The moment I walked in, I saw Blake Ryder. He was in a sharp, tailored suit, a circle of investors hanging on his every word. He spoke with an air of absolute confidence, gesturing with dramatic flair. Chloe stood beside him, her smile perfectly pleasant but lacking its usual ease. When she saw me, her gaze faltered. Blake followed her line of sight, and a smirk played on his lips. A few minutes later, he made his way over to me. Caleb, good to see you. We saw each other a few days ago, I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. He chuckled. That wasn't a social call. And this is, let's call it a friendly chat. He leaned in, lowering his voice. You've been making some big moves lately. Just reallocating capital. Vance Corp is feeling the pressure. That's the current market climate. He looked at me, then asked abruptly, You're just jealous, aren't you? A few people nearby glanced over. I smiled faintly. Jealous of what? That she chose me. I took a sip of my drink, swirling the amber liquid. I'm out of the game. You've just been dealt in. His smile froze. You think you made a clean break? My balance sheet is clean, yes. His eyes turned cold. Vance Corp's problems didn't start yesterday. All the more reason to sort them out. He stared at me for a few seconds, then said in a low voice, "You just wait." "For what?" "To see who's left holding the bag. That would be your job." I didn't linger, turning to speak with another investor. Mid-conversation, I noticed Chloe standing a short distance away, her expression conflicted. She didn't approach me. Just before I left, I received a text from Mark. "Two more partners have put their Vance Corp contracts on hold." I replied with a single word, "Noted." The next morning, the situation became clearer. Blake Ryder's fundraising efforts for his own company had stalled. A key venture capital firm that had previously committed to investing had backed out at the last minute. The reason was simple. With Vance Corp's financial stability in question, the risk profile had shot up. It was a chain reaction. When Mark reported it, his tone was clinical. They were planning to use Vance as collateral. Now that the collateral is shaky, they're spooked. A normal market reaction. Ryder is scrambling to find new financing. I kept my eyes on the document in front of me. Will he succeed? The terms will be brutal. That afternoon, I got a text from Chloe. "Do you have time to meet?" I didn't reply immediately. Half an hour later, she was in the lobby of my building. This time, she wasn't dressed for a gala. A simple white blouse, the ends of her hair slightly frayed. I had her sent up. She walked in and got straight to the point. "You looked into him." "It wasn't a question. It's public information. You sent his history to the investors." "I didn't have to." She stared at me, her eyes a storm of emotions. "They all found out. Investors do their own due diligence." She fell silent. "His first marriage, it was a business arrangement." "I'm aware." "You knew." "I do now." Her voice tightened. "Did you suspect this all along?" "I look at data." "What about people?" "People are reflected in the data." She let out a bitter little laugh. "I used to think you were cold. Now I realize you see everything coming." "I can't predict emotions." The words hung in the air between us. She turned her face away. "He's under a lot of pressure." "So are you." She looked back at me. "Aren't you worried we might turn this around?" "That depends on your capabilities." She bit her lower lip. "Do you really not feel anything?" "I'm no longer in a position to interfere." Her expression darkened. "So you're just going to watch?" "I'm not the one pushing." She was quiet for a long time. "He wanted me to come talk to you." "About what?" "About a partnership." "Under what terms?" "For Reed Industries to reinvest." I almost smiled. "Why would I do that?" She said quietly, "We can offer you a larger stake. The risk hasn't changed. We can restructure the projects. The funding gap is already here." She looked at me, her voice rising slightly. "Are you just going to watch him get cornered by the market?" "He chose this path." Her voice began to tremble. "Do you really not hate me?" "Hate doesn't solve a cash flow problem." She froze. After a few seconds, she asked, "If I hadn't left, would you be doing this to Vance Corp?" "No." The color drained from her face. "So, it is because of me." "It's because the decision-making structure changed." She fell silent again. That famous Vance pride was crumbling before my eyes. She walked to the window and looked out. "He told me he could handle it." "Then let him." She turned back, a flicker of doubt in her eyes for the first time. "Caleb, did you ever think that he got close to me because—" She didn't finish the sentence. I looked at her. "You're only thinking about that now." She looked down at the floor. The office was completely silent. She stood there for a moment, then said quietly, "He sent me here to prove that he's better than you. Being better isn't something you say. It's something you do." She looked up. "Then why don't you just crush him?" "I've already exited the game." She looked at me as if the weight of those words was just now hitting her. Exited. No longer a player. No longer responsible. She stood motionless, silent for a long time. "His company's cash flow is getting tight too," she said suddenly. "That's to be expected." "You're not surprised at all?" "Structure determines outcomes." She gave a bitter smile. "You saw this coming." "I only look at the numbers." She didn't say anything else. As she reached the door, she paused. "He sent me here to convince you." "And what do you think now?" She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know." It was the first time I had ever heard her say those words. The door closed. I looked at the file on my desk. Blake Ryder's fundraising timeline was now indefinitely delayed. His partners were waiting. The market never makes way for feelings. I didn't lift a finger against him. I didn't have to. Some gambles, once made, have to be paid for by the player who made them. 05, the third time Blake Ryder's fundraising round was postponed. The market had made its verdict clear. It wasn't an outright rejection. It was a slow, painful squeeze. The terms became harsher, the valuation plummeting with each passing day. The atmosphere inside Vance Corp grew even more tense. With both their main ventures and their new leadership under fire, the boardroom was filled with open dissent. Mark handed me the latest summary. Vance Corp stock has been in a steady decline. A few minority shareholders have started selling off their positions. Who's buying? Mostly retail investors. No major players. I nodded. Keep monitoring. At 4 p.m., my assistant buzzed. Ms. Vance is here. She says she has an appointment. I looked up. Sent her in. When the door opened, I barely recognized her. She was wearing a simple black suit, no jewelry, her hair pulled back. Her face was paler than ever. The innate pride that had always defined her seemed to have been stripped away. She walked to my desk and spoke without preamble. We can renegotiate. Her tone was all business. I closed my file. Negotiate what? She sat down, her fingers laced tightly together. The projects. Be specific. The Vance Commercial Complex. You can come back in. The terms. A larger stake. How much? She named a figure. It was significantly higher than before. I looked at her. What's the funding gap? She hesitated. 15 million short term. And long term, we're still running the numbers. I leaned back in my chair. The risk profile hasn't changed. We can phase the investment. Collateral. Core assets. And their liquidity. She fell silent. I didn't press her. She looked up at me. We could put our personal history aside. This can be strictly business. The effort it took for her to say that was palpable. I studied her. Whose wife are you right now? The air in the room froze. She went pale. Her fingers dug into the armrests of her chair. I knew you would ask that. It's a relevant fact. She said quietly, a marriage doesn't have to be a business partnership. Then in what capacity are you here today? She had no answer. I stood up, walked to a cabinet, and retrieved a file. I placed it on the desk in front of her. This is Reed Industries' new partnership slate. She opened it. Vance Corp wasn't on the first page, or the second. Her hand was trembling slightly by the time she reached the end. You had this planned all along. Capital can't sit idle. She looked up, her voice tight with emotion. You won't even leave a window open for us. There's no sound business reason to. I can step down from management. That's an internal matter for your company. She stared at me, her eyes welling up. Caleb, we grew up together. That was the past. She took a shaky breath. How can you be so heartless? I don't make emotional decisions. A small, hollow laugh escaped her. There's not an ounce of warmth in you anymore. Warmth doesn't fix a balance sheet. She closed the file. What if I get a divorce? The question came out of nowhere. I looked at her, my expression unchanged. That would be your choice. If I cut all ties with him, would you reconsider? The project's risk profile doesn't change just because you get divorced. She finally understood. My refusal wasn't about terms. It was about the fact that the entire structure had changed. She stood up and paced the length of my office. Blake said you were just waiting for us to beg. He said that. He said you'd cave eventually. I looked at her. He sent you here to test me? She didn't deny it. After a few seconds of silence, she said quietly, he's under a lot of pressure. And you. So am I. For the first time, her voice was laced with pure exhaustion. Some of the board members are already suggesting we bring in outside capital. The terms are predatory. Then you'll have to evaluate them. We be deluded into obscurity. That's the reality of the situation. She walked back and stood in front of me. Caleb, I can admit it. I made a mistake. I didn't respond. I thought he could bring new resources, new growth. And now I can't see a way out. She looked down, as if swallowing something bitter. I never imagined you would pull out so completely. It was a necessary step. She suddenly looked up. Do you have even a single regret? No, she froze. The confidence that had been her birthright, the certainty that the world would always bend to her will, shattered in that one moment. She sank back in her chair, her voice barely a whisper. This is the first time in my life I've felt like a failure. Failure is an outcome, not an identity. She looked up at me. You never would have spoken to me like this before. Before, you weren't on the other side of the table. She fell silent. The only sound in the office was the hum of the air conditioning. After a few minutes, she stood up again. Then let me ask one more time. Go on. If Vance Corp's management is completely replaced by a professional team, would you consider reinvesting? That would depend on the proposal. She nodded. I'll have a new proposal drawn up. You don't have much time. I know. She walked to the door, then paused. At the board meeting today, Blake started shifting some of the blame onto me. Did you sign off on the decisions? I did. Then you share the responsibility. She closed her eyes. He's starting to throw me under the bus. I wasn't surprised. Are you starting to see him clearly now? She didn't answer. When the door closed, her silhouette seemed incredibly fragile. That night, Vance Corp's stock fell again. When my investment team reported it, their tone was cautious. Mr. Reed, we're getting inquiries about a potential acquisition. No comment for now. Yes, sir. I stood at the window. The lights of the building across from mine blinked on, one by one. I remembered the first time I saw her in a formal gown, standing by my side at a gala. She had told me then that one day, Vance Corp would be even bigger. She always had ambition. But ambition needs to be backed by judgment. My phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. I'm redoing the proposal. I didn't reply. The partnership slate was still open on my desk. Every dollar of our capital already had a destination. This wasn't about emotion. It was about a change in position. She thought she was only losing an engagement. In reality, she was losing her foundation. 3 days after Chloe promised a new proposal, the market delivered its own verdict. The full extent of Blake Ryder's corporate debt was publicly disclosed. It wasn't a rumor. It was a formal financial filing. Several short-term loans were past due, interest was compounding, and his cash flow was non-existent. Mark placed a report on my desk. We've confirmed it's all accurate. I scanned the pages. Is Vance Corp on the hook for any of it? There are joint liability clauses on a few projects. I looked up. Did she sign them? A COO, yes. She was the chief operating officer of Vance Corporation, and she was Blake Ryder's wife. The two lines were now hopelessly entangled. At 3 p.m., Vance Corp announced a change in personal shareholdings. Chloe Vance was selling a portion of her personal stock. The price was low. It was obvious where the money was going, to plug the hole in his sinking ship. Mark's tone was clinical. She's trying to save him. Can she? Unlikely. In the evening, I met with representatives from 2 major banks. They were direct. Mr. Reed, is Reed Industries interested in participating in a debt restructuring for Vance Corp? We have no plans at this time. If their financial chain breaks, it could impact industry confidence. The industry has more than one chain. They nodded, understanding my position, and didn't press further. I had just returned to my office after seeing them out when my assistant knocked. Ms. Vance is in the lobby. I was silent for a second. Sent her up. When the door opened, she was almost unrecognizable. No makeup. Her eyes were red and swollen. She walked in and closed the door softly behind her. You saw the news? I did. She stood in front of my desk, not taking a seat. His company's debt is worse than I thought. The filings are public. The banks are already at his door. Standard procedure. A bitter, broken laugh escaped her. You knew it would end this way, didn't you? I look at structures. You couldn't have warned me? I did. She froze. When? The day you walked in here to break our engagement. She fell silent. The air in the room was heavy, suffocating. She suddenly sat down and buried her face in her hands. After a few seconds, she looked up, her voice raw. He's not you. I looked at her. Did you consider that when you chose him? Her fingers clenched the arms of the chair. I thought he was a risk taker. Taking a risk isn't the same as being able to withstand the consequences. She closed her eyes. At the board meeting today, they motioned to have me removed as COO. On what grounds? Poor judgment. You signed the documents. Yes. She didn't try to deny it. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't offer scorn. She looked up suddenly. If I step down now, will you intervene? No. The color drained from her face again. Why not? The risk hasn't disappeared. She stared at me. Even if Vance Corp goes under, the market will determine its value. Tears suddenly streamed down her face. Not hysterically, silently. I didn't offer her a tissue. This wasn't about being cold. It was about respecting the boundary that now existed between us. She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. At the meeting today, Blake told everyone I was the one who pushed for the expansion. Did you? I signed off on it. Then you own it. She shot to her feet. Do you think I deserve this? I don't pass judgment. She laughed. a sound full of self-loathing. I used to think I could control everything. And now my marriage is falling apart. I looked at her. What does he say? He says it's just temporary pressure. Debt doesn't respond to platitudes. She was silent for a long time. We had a fight in public yesterday. The media saw. They did. I didn't ask for details. He started to distance himself, she said quietly. He's telling everyone the decisions were mine. And how did you respond? I didn't. Silence is also a response. She gave a bitter smile. I'm realizing I never really knew him. It's not too late to see clearly. It is. She looked at me. Do you really feel nothing? I've already exited. She stood there, as if a support beam had been kicked out from under her. My father's health is failing, the board is in revolt, and now I have to deal with his debt. That is the reality. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Caleb, I have never, ever thought of myself as a loser. I didn't engage with the word. This is about judgment, not about winning or losing. She fell silent. After a few minutes, she sat back down. If Vance Corp is restructured, will you participate? It depends on the terms. What terms? Control. She froze. You want a controlling stake. It's the only way to mitigate the risk. Her breathing hitched. But then, Vance Corp would no longer belong to my family. Does it now? She had no reply. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She glanced at it but didn't answer. Is that him? I asked. She nodded. He says he can still find new investors. At what price? A very low one. That's the cost. She looked up. If I hadn't left you, would you have helped me carry all of this? None of this would have happened. The light in her eyes dimmed. I used to think you were too cold. Cold keeps your vision clear. She stood up. I didn't come here today to beg. Then why did you come? For an honest answer. Ask, does Vance Corp have a future? Yes. She held her breath. On what condition? That you accept reality. She was quiet for a long time. And the reality is restructure, downsize, and bring in new capital, including you, if the terms are right. She nodded. Then I'll go convince the board. To accept being diluted, it's better than collapsing entirely. When she said it, her voice was steady. The impulsive, arrogant girl was gone. In her place was someone who had been forced to become clear-eyed. She paused at the door. Blake brought up divorce today. I looked at her. What do you think? She paused for a few seconds. I don't know. Think it through before you decide. She nodded. The door closed. The office was quiet again. Mark came in. The Vance Corp board just announced a preliminary restructuring plan. The details, scaling back projects, seeking external investment, and the equity split, still under negotiation. I nodded. Stay on it. Night fell. The lights of the building across the street glowed. I sat in my chair, feeling nothing in particular. She had gone from impulsive to regretful. I had gone from restrained to in control. The game was still changing, but the final direction was already clear. 073 days after Vance Corp announced its restructuring plan, a formal letter arrived at Reed Industries. It wasn't a text from Chloe. It was an official invitation to partner, sent on behalf of the entire Vance board. The language was measured, the content direct. They hoped Reed Industries would participate as a strategic investor. All terms were negotiable. I left the letter on my desk, not responding immediately. Mark stood by. This came through official channels. Who's leading the charge? Robert Vance signed it himself. I nodded. Schedule the meeting. It was set for 2 p.m. at the Vance Corp headquarters. I kept my team small, just my heads of legal and finance. The atmosphere in their boardroom was much colder than I remembered. Mr. Vance sat at the head of the table, looking years older. The other directors wore grim expressions. Chloe sat at the far end of the table, no longer at the center of power. Her position was clear, a vice president, here to observe. I sat down and laid out my files. Mr. Vance spoke first. Caleb, this is a corporate-level discussion. I understand. Vance Corp is willing to offer a significant equity stake to bring Reed Industries on board. What percentage? He named a figure. Not enough for a controlling interest. I glanced at my CFO. He gave a slight shake of his head. I closed my file. That percentage is not sufficient to justify the risk. The room fell silent. One of the directors spoke up. Mr. Reed, what are your terms? A controlling stake. The two words hung in the air, tightening the tension in the room. Mr. Vance's fingers tapped on the table. A controlling stake means the Vance family loses control. Do you have control now? The directors exchanged uneasy glances. My CFO projected a risk assessment onto the screen. Without an immediate capital injection, Vance Corp's cash flow will hit critical levels within 3 months. The data was cold, hard, and irrefutable. An older director murmured, "What about other investors?" I didn't have to answer. My CFO did it for me. The terms being offered by other firms are far more severe. Mr. Vance was silent for a long time. "Caleb, do you really have to push it this far? This is a business negotiation." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a complex mix of regret and frustration. "You and Chloe, you grew up together. We're talking about the company now." He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Give us a few minutes." Of course. The meeting was temporarily adjourned. I stood by a window in the hallway. A few minutes later, Chloe walked out. She wore no makeup, her expression placid. "You're really going for a controlling stake? It's a prerequisite. But then, it won't be our family's company anymore." "It already isn't." She looked at me. "You've changed completely. My position has changed." She fell silent. "The board will agree," she said finally. "Why?" "Because there's no other option." She said it without any hint of emotion. The arrogant fire she once possessed had been completely extinguished. A few minutes later, we were back in the boardroom. Mr. Vance made the announcement. "We accept the terms for a controlling stake." The directors nodded in agreement. There were no more objections. The terms were hammered out quickly. Reed Industries would provide the capital in exchange for a majority share. The Vance family would retain a few seats on the board, but would lose all final decision-making power. On the day of the signing, the room was silent. I signed from the chairman's seat. Mr. Vance signed beside me. Chloe stood off to the side, with no official role to play. She watched the documents being executed, her face a blank mask. After the signing, I stood up. "The integration process will be led by my team." "Understood," Mr. Vance said, his voice heavy. The meeting concluded. People filed out of the room. Chloe was the last to leave. She walked up to me. "Do you have any regrets?" I looked at her. "No." She studied my face for a few seconds, as if searching for a lie. "Not even once." "No," she nodded slowly. "I understand." She said nothing more. I walked out of the boardroom. The lights in the hallway were bright. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Blake Ryder has filed for divorce." I stopped walking. "Confirmed?" I typed back. "The papers have been submitted." I put my phone away. The marriage he had so publicly defended was now a liability he needed to shed. It was not a surprise. That evening, Reed Industries held an internal meeting to plan the integration. I sat at the head of the table. Reevaluate all of Vance Corp's projects. Cut the losing divisions. Retain the core assets. My team took notes. This time, I wasn't standing behind Vance Corporation. I was in front of it. As the meeting ended, Mark asked me, "Mr. Reed, should I coordinate with Ms. Vance on the transition? Treat her like any other shareholder." "Understood." Night settled over the city. I returned to my office. The glass wall reflected the city lights back at me. The Vance Corp logo was still on the building across the way, but its ownership structure had fundamentally changed. My phone buzzed again. It was Chloe. He filed for divorce. I looked at it, but didn't reply right away. A minute later, another message came through. "I guess it happens that fast." I typed back a single line. "Read the terms carefully before you sign." A long pause on her end. "Thank you." I put my phone down. There was nothing else to say. She had gone from the main character to a spectator, and I had gone from fiancé to chairman. None of it was because of emotion. It was simply the consequence of a choice. 1 year later. The Vance Corporation name was still on the building, but the company beneath it was completely transformed. Reed Industries was the majority owner. The integration was complete. The portfolio had been streamlined to 3 core divisions. All toxic assets had been liquidated, the staff restructured, and the balance sheet was clean. I sat in the chairman's office, signing the last page of the annual audit report. My CFO stood beside me. Vance Corp reported a positive cash flow this year for the first time in a while. Profit margin? Low but healthy. I nodded. Stay the course. After he left, my assistant came in. The bankruptcy proceedings for Blake Ryder's company have been finalized. I didn't pause my work. And him personally, assets are frozen. His corporate entities have been dissolved. Noted, in the span of a year, He had gone from a media darling to a footnote. The market has no patience for failure. At 3 p.m., I received a call from Chloe. Her number hadn't appeared on my phone in a long time. Do you have time to meet? Where? The old spot. She meant that quiet cafe in the West Village we used to go to when we were younger. I arrived on time. She was already there, sitting by the window. No heels, no perfect makeup, just a simple white blouse, her hair falling naturally over her shoulders. She looked up as I approached and offered a small smile. It's been a while. It has. I sat down. The waiter came over, and she ordered a black coffee. He signed the papers, she said. I heard. It was quicker than I expected. For him, it was cutting a loss. She nodded. I used to think marriage was an asset, and now, it's a liability. She said it without a trace of emotion. Vance Corp is doing well, she continued. The board speaks very highly of you. That's the team's work. You become even more serious. The position requires it. She looked at me. I've stepped down from the board. I know. I'm just a private shareholder now. That's for the best. She smiled faintly. Aren't you at all curious how I've been? If you want to tell me, you can. She looked down, tracing the rim of her cup with a finger. When the divorce first started, it was hard to accept. Then I realized it had been broken for a long time. Did you ever hate me? I looked at her. No, she met my gaze. Really, emotion doesn't solve problems. She was quiet for a moment. I used to think you were too rational. Do you still think that? Now I think I was too impulsive. The cafe was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the window, falling across our table. She asked suddenly, if I hadn't made that choice back then, what do you think would have happened to us? We'll never know. She smiled again. Still no room for hypotheticals. Hypotheticals are pointless. She nodded. I've learned something this past year. What's that? No one else will pay the price for your mistakes. She said it slowly, deliberately. I didn't respond. She went on. I thought I could have it all, the passion and the power. And you ended up with neither. And now I know how to read a balance sheet. She looked up at me. You taught me that. A faint smile touched my lips. I didn't teach you anything. You did, with your actions. She took a sip of her coffee. I came here to say I'm sorry. It's not necessary. I owe you an explanation. It's in the past. She fell silent. After a few seconds, she asked, Are you happy now? I considered it for a moment. I'm clear-headed. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a complex understanding. You really don't have any regrets? None. She nodded. Good. There was no argument between us, no blame. Only the quiet residue of time. She stood up. If the company needs anything from me in the future, I'll cooperate. We'll follow the official procedures. She smiled one last time. You don't give an inch, do you? Business is business. She said nothing more. As she walked out of the cafe, there was no sharp click of heels. Her steps were light. I stood at the door and watched her get into a car. It drove away without a backward glance. That night, I was back in my office. Outside my window was the familiar glass facade of the building across the street. The city lights burned brightly. In 1 year, the entire landscape had shifted. Vance Corp was now a subsidiary of Reed Industries. Blake Ryder was gone from the stage. Chloe had moved from the center to the periphery. And I sat in this office, having lost nothing. My phone buzzed. A work-related message. I replied and put it down. The night outside was deep and dark. My reflection stared back at me from glass. No ripples of emotion. No regrets. Her choice to leave was her freedom. My choice to divest was my right. Every outcome was the result of a decision made in a moment in time. No one is responsible for the consequences of another's choices. And no one waits forever for someone else to turn back. I turned off the lights in my office. The elevator doors slid silently shut. In this game, there were no winners or losers. There was only clarity.